Good evening. Welcome to the Chapel of the Cross for those who are here with us in person as well as those who are joining us online. We are so excited to be having a conversation with Mother Sharron Dinnie, founder and rector of Kwasa College in Springs, South Africa. The My Spiritual Awakening Speaker Series is a Lilly Endowment funded program of our Episcopal Campus Ministry. It strives to bring our student and parish community into opportunities of conversation with leaders in their fields who will reflect on the intertwinings of their paths of their vocational life as well as their spiritual journey. This conversation and visitation with Mother Sharron and her companions is done in conjunction with the Global Mission Committee, and I'm so thankful for all of the work that you've done in building and maintaining the relationship between the Chapel of the Cross here and the Chapel of the Cross at Kwasa College in South Africa. Light, life, love. Kwasa College was founded in 2002 to meet the needs of South African children living in settlement communities in Springs, South Africa, about 30 miles east of Johannesburg. The school serves pre-primary age students through 7th grade and is called a college as the vernacular to refer to a privately funded school as opposed to a public school. The 405 students who benefit from Kwasa College range from ages 3 to 13 and are being prepared for secondary school. Not only do they benefit from their talented educators at the school, but they receive 2 meals a day and a safe and healthy environment to grow and learn and thrive in. The more education a child receives, the greater the impact they will have on their family, their community, in combating poverty. To quote Mother Sharron, "We believe that every child has innate, God-given potential just waiting to be realized and are dedicated to being a conduit to achieve that potential. This belief is embodied in the school motto, light, life, love." Mother Sharron Dinnie grew up in Florida, South Africa. You heard that correctly. A suburb on the west side of Johannesburg. Trained as a teacher in college, married, and is the mother of 2 now adult children. She's also a grandmother. Sharron was the second woman to be ordained to the priesthood in the Anglican Church of South Africa in 1992. She's been ordained for 31 years, 20 of which she spent as rector of St. Peter and St. Paul's Church in Springs, South Africa. She enjoys singing in several community choirs, playing tennis, and spending time with her grandchildren. But even more amazing, she recently enjoyed an experience on a Harley motorcycle. Now that I have your attention, we'll turn to the conversation. So, Mother Sharron, I would invite you to tell me a little bit about growing up in Johannesburg, in South Africa, in the 1950s and 60s. What a unique time. As a young schoolgirl at that time, and as part of the Anglican Church community, what was your faith community experience like? And what did you see in the community around you?
You do realize that going back to the 1950s, 60s is quite a journey for me. Well, as you've already mentioned, I grew up in a little mining town on the West Rand, which is west of Johannesburg, called Florida. The school system then consisted of a primary school. I attended primary school, I went to a high school, and then, as you've also mentioned, went on to University of the Witwatersrand. Growing up as a youngster, we had so much more freedom than our youth today have. Freedom to take time after school just to play games and, socialize with friends. I had a wonderful youth, childhood. I enjoyed. I only had one brother, and So I grew up doing boys' things, climbing trees and fixing bicycles and playing rugby, soccer, all the boys' sports. An important part of my childhood, I suppose, was my membership at a church. I worshipped at St. Gabriel's, which was the church in Florida where my mother and father had got married. As I say, an Anglican church, and that's really where there and in my home, from my parents, that's where my spiritual formation began. I was confirmed at a very young age, too young actually to know what a commitment in confirmation was, but I was 11 years old, and I've been a member of that church, as I say, all my life, but at 11, when the bishop laid his hands upon my forehead and did the deed, it's the first moment that I can actually recall sensing the presence of God and God's Spirit. Hadn't been prepared for what might happen. And so this amazingly warm feeling, an incredible feeling of just God's love at that moment. And after the confirmation moment, and when I was confirmed at that stage still, we all had to look like little religious nuns. We had veils which were tied around us, and I had a very angry lady who before the confirmation service had tied my veil on, and she didn't realize, but she'd caught up all these hairs at the back of my head so that and it was so painful. But as I say, that sensation of just warmth, joy was so great. And as I returned to the pew, I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Just an emotion that I'd never really sensed before. But as I returned to the pew and looked up towards the altar, I had this pull, I need to be there. I want to be there at the altar. And that was weird because in those days, I think it was universal really, but girls were not allowed up in the sanctuary. So we had boys who could be acolytes or servers. I had the temerity to speak to the priest after my confirmation service, and I was so full of passion and joy and excitement about what this could mean. I really, Father, want to be a server. The reply was, yes, but you're a girl. And girls are not allowed in the sanctuary. So why don't you just wait a little bit and then you can do what girls can do in the church? Which was, when one was older, teach Sunday school, and even older, you could make tea, after the service. All good and honorable and important services, but not quite what I'd had in mind. That conversation caused such deep and profound hurt in me because I had shared something which was so precious, something which was so intimate, if you can understand that, between me and God. This really call upon my life to give my life in service to God and to the church, and to have it minimized to that degree of, no, go away, you're a girl. It was extremely hurtful, and it took me many years, many years, before I could verbalize and articulate that what had happened to me and what was happening inside of me and what was always there. So, as I say, that was age 11, and then I did what I could in the church growing up. I went to university and I trained to become a teacher. but still this tug on my heart and my life was so profound that before I went into a teaching position at the school, the high school at which I'd actually studied and where I matriculated, I felt I needed help to try and make sense of this jumble that was inside me, this conflict. So I was friends with someone who had actually entered an Ursuline convent, and I spent some time with the Ursulines, and it was a little bit like the story Sound of Music. You remember, what was her name, Maria? No, we're not quite sure what we do with you. So it wasn't a vocation to religious life. So I went on to begin a teaching career. I later became married. I had the same struggle before getting married about, yes, it feels so right and I'm in love, but there was still this pull towards God. But I married. I had one child and lost two, and was still doing what the church felt was okay for a female to do in the church. I became what we call a lay minister. I think you have a different
Lay Eucharist.
terminology. There we go. Lay. But there again, I was so excited when our priest said he would like me to become but we were called lay ministers, because in my understanding that meant that I could get that step closer to the altar. I could be involved in these holy things of the sacrament and minister. However, that hadn't been my priest's idea at all. He was wanting just to solemnize, I suppose, my involvement in teaching and education. And so my license as lay minister was, I was licensed to teach. So to teach confirmation, to teach adult formation, to prepare people for baptism, even marriage. It was such, again, a slap in the face, to have discounted what I so deeply felt called to. But in obedience, I accepted the license and I practiced as such for a number of years. And then a new rector moved into the parish, and even up to that point, I still had not built up enough confidence to speak to anybody about what I had discerned as a call to priesthood. And then this rector, without me opening the conversation to him, and to this day I thank God for him and the part that he played in my spiritual journey from then on, because he said he was actually responsible in the diocese for Christian education, and he said that he would like to speak to the bishop on my behalf and suggest that I become part of the next, we call them Board of Ministry conferences or selection conference. And that opened the conversation between him and I. And he said he discerned in just watching me that there was a vocation. My husband was totally threatened at this stage, because I think he'd felt all along that at some stage he was going to lose me to God and to the church. But he agreed that I should go on this conference, and he went with me. And at this conference, there were 23 guys, men of all ages, exploring their vocations, and there was myself. And the whole conference ended on a Sunday evening, and everybody was supposed to go home, and we would be notified. But I did notice my own rector, and a number of others, and those on the board stayed for an awful long time afterwards. And apparently, they were discussing me and the fact that they'd really come up with a conundrum, if that's the right word, because at that stage, it wasn't possible to ordain women to the priesthood, and yet the consensus had been that they sensed that I had a vocation to the priesthood, and so I'd given them a big problem. However, not long after that, the Anglican Church in Southern Africa agreed at Episcopal Synod to ordain women to the diaconate. So I was ordained deacon and to serve in the parish where I'd been baptized, confirmed, married. And so that was my entry into ordained ministry. At that stage, I was still teaching as well at the local convent where I'd been for a number of years, 16 years in fact. But then the diocese asked me to become director of theological education in the diocese, so that was... And eventually I was... that rector left and they didn't have a replacement, so I was rector in charge of a parish, which was really rather difficult because I could preach and I could teach, but I could bury the dead. I could prepare people for marriage, but I couldn't marry them. And of course, I couldn't preside at the Eucharist, which, you know, was so central to my calling and something that I felt really God had always, you know, centered my ministry around the sacrament and about ministering to people in and through that sacrament. So during the week, we'd have to find a retired priest somewhere who could come in and celebrate the Eucharist. I also could not, you know, give a blessing. And in those early days, there were many people. This church actually, not my own parish, because they'd grown up with me and I with them, so they accepted my vocation so easily. But there were others that just couldn't live with a woman up at the altar. And so sometimes when, after I had been ordained priest, I would watch, and when it was time for the blessing, people would get up and walk out. And again, that was so painful because I felt that was one way of just conferring God's blessing upon people, you know, as they went out to face life without them, at least with God. So those early years were very difficult. It wasn't only laity that had a problem with women, priests, male clergy were also, many of them, saying things like, you know, my vocation could not be authentic because God does not call women to be priests. So what I was sensing and had sensed from age 11 was not authentic. So my integrity, I felt that my integrity was called into question. So this first few years were very difficult. We'd have clergy meetings called by the bishop, and you know, the venue might be a school, and the bishop would say, well, guys, there are no kids here now, so we've got the place to ourselves. You can use the male and female toilets. Great. Hello, I'm here. But slowly with time, it became more acceptable, and I was ordained priest in, as I say, the parish where I'd grown up and where people knew me. And but soon after that, the diocese and the bishop in particular started looking for women with vocations, just to kind of increase the number, which made it slightly easier. But yes, my ordination happened and this wasn't customary. Ordinations to the priesthood happened in the cathedral normally, but the bishop was anticipating such opposition from certain people that he felt it safer to move it from the cathedral to the parish in which, as I say, I grew up in and had been serving. But they had a police presence, and everybody who was anybody in the diocese was there just in case. But during the service, as you would know, a priest about to be ordained has to prostrate themselves on, the carpet. So at the appropriate time, I got onto my knees and then down onto, and again, that moment, and it was so amazing that it had been in the same spot where I'd been, as I say, baptized, confirmed, and then finally ordained. But the moment was so big that I started to weep, literally weep, thinking I'm safe, nobody can see me. But then I smelt the strange smell, and I thought, what is that? It smells like mud. And then I realized, and I started to giggle, because my tears had been mixing with the dust in the carpet. And so my next thought, talk about, from the sublime to the ridiculous. My tears had been forming mud under one. I thought, I better have these carpets cleaned on Monday. Yeah, and so as Mary Cat has shared, I celebrated my 30th anniversary to the priesthood last year with a big service, just of celebration, and from my part, thanksgiving to God for the privilege that has been mine for all these years now. It was 31 years. It will be 31 years on the 6th of November this year. To give thanks to God for the privilege of serving.
Yeah. So you had your youth, your childhood. There were some opportunities that God was sort of awakening in you from as early as age 11. And when you went off to university, you did not have that as an open door. And so you chose and found yourself pursuing teaching as a profession, which again was employed over and over again by the church, not only in your parish, but on the diocesan level, really lifting up those gifts. And shortly, well, maybe not shortly, so 1991, you had been ordained, you were newly ordained about 10 years later, just across the turn of the century. Something brought you to a new awareness. You were brought to a new place to fulfill that vocation, and some other parts of the community were getting your attention as well. So you had about 10 years under your belt, 10 or 11 years of priesthood.
It was.
All of that journey to get there, and now you're well established. The recognition and appreciation of women in clergy roles was shifting, was changing. What happened in 2002 that led to the vision and the birth of what is now Kwasa College?
I had moved, changed. I, as I say, was born, raised, lived, ordained, served in the Diocese of Johannesburg. A friend of mine was bishop in a neighboring diocese, the Diocese of the Highveld, and he had asked me on many occasions to come to his diocese, and it had never seemed right until 1999, and he said, come and see, just come and see, and I thought, the Diocese of the Highveld is geomorphologically and geographically and so on, it's very flat. It's to me very uninteresting compared to the diocese from which I came, and as far as I could see, there were no redeeming features in this. But I thought in deference to our friendship, and I would go and see. So my husband and I went out to the local parish, and he'd enticed me. He was actually quite wicked, even though he was a bishop, because he told stories. And he tried to make it more attractive by saying, the rectory is sea-facing. So I thought, oh, that's not too bad, you know, you can see the sea. But anyways, so he took me, or took us to the parish and to the rectory, and I said, this is very nice, but where's the sea? He said, no. I said it was sea-facing. I didn't say you could see the sea from here. Again, obviously, you know, lots of prayer. My youngest son was still at school, and where we were moving from to Springs was quite some distance. And it did mean a choice between uprooting him or leaving him there. Decided to leave him where he was. I think he had about another 4 years to go until he matriculated. So I accepted the invitation to go to the parish of Springs, and I started in the new millennium, 2000, 1st of January, and it was not long before I was introduced to an informal settlement which was actually within the boundaries of the parish. A large community, and someone at the time was doing some sort of sociological study, and I think the number was between 12 and 15,000 people living in this community, largely in shacks, informal dwellings, poverty of, you know, some depth, unemployment rates very high, all the social ills, which I know one finds in any community, but I think just rather more of abuse, neglect, orphans. And what struck me most forcibly was the lack of educational facilities for children, because most of the children in that area could not speak English, so to attend the schools in town was not an option, and yet there was no transportation to what we call townships, which have always been made or established outside of our towns, and I'm talking historically now, you know, before 1994. But there was no way that many of these children could actually access schools. And I tried to get together what we would call members of a minister's fraternal, masculine, you know, but the priests in the Catholic Church and other denominations, to try and see if we could get together and try and meet some of the needs in this community. There were just so many needs. And so we met with the leaders of the community of the settlement called Daggafontein. And the most obvious area in which I felt called to help was in that of education. I didn't feel I had the gifts to help with an environmental project or growing vegetables or things like that. So I kind of felt comfortable with trying to see what I could do about just increasing the level of availability of education to these children. So I worked closely with the community, and first thing was to try and find a venue within the community themselves. In the shack community, there was no property that could lend itself to what we were looking for. Finally, people pointed me to what had been a gold mine for many, many years, but in the 1970s had ceased to function for various reasons, the main one being that the gold standard had dropped, and recovering mine from the deep levels at which it existed was no longer financially viable. So I found some really dilapidated buildings, not inside the settlement, but some distance away, but where I squatted for some time with the permission of the owner of this property. And yeah, before I knew what was happening, there were 74 children, and the need was there. The number of children grew. I thought initially I would start a primary school because that seemed to be the bigger need. But I banged my head so hard against every door in the education department trying to get funding and support that eventually I thought, this is not working, and I'm actually doing these children an injustice. I had no money, and I had no teachers, and now and again I'd find a volunteer teacher who would come in, but the minute they got a proper job where there was a salary, they left. So I decided to start at grassroots level, managed to organize transport to the schools in the township for the children that were attending my school, and started a pre-primary school, which is an early childhood development center, children from 3 to 6 years old. And when I took that step, things happened. The lady who was the organist in my church, in the parish church, she'd become a friend, but she was a teacher of long experience at a local school, one of the better primary schools in the area. And after Mass one Sunday, Eucharist service, she said to me, I need to speak to you. I said, great. Thought I was in trouble. Did I select the wrong hymns? What happened? Anyway, she sat me down and said, I'm not quite sure who's to blame here. I really don't know if it's God talking to me, or if it's you, or if it's both of you who are ganging up on me. But she said, I feel I must talk to you about your school. And she was, of course, discerning a call from God to use her obvious giftedness, a talent which she'd been given by God and been using productively for 27 years. But, as I say, God's saying, needs to be in a different place now. So she did a very brave thing. She resigned, and she came to work at Kwasa with me, for me, became head of that little pre-primary school, made sacrifices, answering a call, a vocation, generally means making sacrifices of some sort or other. So she sacrificed much, but came to Kwasa and was amazing. And so the pre-primary school took off under her leadership, and obviously important things happened, like us being able to create and grow partnerships within our community and within government structures, became registered with the Department of Social Services, and still are to this day, who partially fund the pre-primary school. And then later on was able to begin a primary school so that the children from our pre-primary school could automatically move into the primary school. That happened in 2014. And we grew the primary school just one class, one grade per year, until we had our primary school complete at the end of 2020. That was all grades up to grade 7. Grew partners like Chapel of the Cross and St. John's in Washington, D.C. I have a partnering church in Ireland, and one in England. And it's just been amazing how people so far removed from where the need is have also heard, God's call to, and I'm just looking at the gospel passage for Sunday, love God, love yourself, and love your neighbor. Who knows who our neighbor is that God calls us to serve and love? So many here at Chapel of the Cross have seen in our little community, our children, the neighbor that God is calling them to serve, which has been amazing. And so, yes, so we have a full primary school now, and my dream, my vision had been, because along the way, a part of the story I haven't told is that I was able to buy the piece of land on which I'd been squatting. And forgive me, Father. But it was with the permission of the owner, I will tell you that. But was able to buy the property, and my vision had always been to build a place where children could be accommodated, could be loved, could be given security from the age 3 right up until the age that they matriculate for us, which is grade 12, and go off to tertiary places. COVID got in the way, of course. We couldn't move fluidly from a primary school to high school. Other circumstances, it will take a lot of money to begin another campus with all the infrastructure that a high school needs. But I sincerely hope that before I finally fall off my little shelf and go to be, hopefully, with my God and enjoy the eternal rest which is promised us, I can see the start of that high school. I really pray that I can do that.
We pray for that too, and we are thrilled to be one of the partners. As you mentioned, you have a few parishes and you have other congregations. You have a global ministry that supports the work that you're doing. One of the questions that I asked you when we talked earlier was, tell me about this entrepreneurial spirit. How did you find these other partners in ministry? How did they come to become a part of your story, and perhaps how did we become a part of that story here at the Chapel of the Cross?
That question only God can answer, seriously, because, when my children were at school and they'd come home with forms, the school was having a fun run or something, and parents were pleased to sell tickets, for this, or sell raffle tickets or something. I used to receive those forms, would fill them out, my own name, and just pay the money. I cannot sell things to anybody. So, and I can't ask people for money easily at all. But somehow, when it's related to Kwasa, I just have to tell the story, and really God does the rest. And I'm not being blasé, I'm not being whatever else I could be. I really mean, God plants in the hearts of people the desire to serve and to help and to minister and to love, as I said, your neighbor and so on. And I really have found that all I have to do is tell the story. And if people come, and those of you who've been to visit us all that way away, I think you'll understand once you've become part of the story, seen those little bodies and their lives and caught the vision, it just happens. It really just happens. It's incredibly humbling for me to just look at what God has done through others, through those that God has drawn in. Because a lot of the time it is money, because I can't pretend we don't need money. We need money. We are what is called a low fee paying independent school. Many, many, many of the parents cannot afford the low fees that we charge, and so at the end of each year there is a large amount of money that is outstanding, owed to the school. And yet again, through the generosity of so many people all over, people of the Chapel of the Cross included. There's enough in our scholarship fund, to every fund, to make it all happen and to make sure that those children have got a place where, as I say, they can receive the help that they need in developing and growing, and one day finally, hopefully, achieving fully that potential which God has created inside of them. So, and how you came to be with us? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
St. John's in Washington were on a hunt for a project to become part of. And they came to South Africa. The then Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, John Chain, and our Bishop, Bishop David Bierke, had got to know one another, and there had been an invitation. And when they came out to South Africa, my bishop invited them to go and see Sharron's funny little project. And they came, and we had nothing, and I mean nothing. I was housing children in those shipping containers, ghastly, awful. The ablutions were almost non-existent. So St. John's came, and they were very polite, and they listened very carefully to my story and my vision and my dreams, and they went away and they said, "Thank you. We're going to a number," and they've traveled over South Africa looking at other places, other projects, and I said goodbye to them, really secretly believing I would never hear from them again. So much was my surprise when not long after that they phoned me, a woman who's become a great friend of mine through our connection. Kay Edwards called me and said, "Sharron, St. John's got back, we went on retreat, we prayed, and the unanimous decision was that we want to partner with you." If ever I've been amazed, it was then. So they started a partnership with us, and shortly after that, they brought a group to South Africa and to Kwasa, as it was then, on a formal visit. And one of your parishioners, I don't think she's here, Barbara Day.
Right there.
Is she here? Barbara Day had heard about it, and she and a friend of yours, Barbara, I think, joined that pilgrimage and came to visit us in South Africa. And that was a remarkable visit for a number of reasons, but one of them was that Barbara Day visited us and didn't think that we were ugly and unattractive, but was able to align herself, and being in education herself, I think her heart warms whenever there's a chance to educate people. So Barbara came back, and some of you would know the rest over here, and sowed the seeds which God needed to be sown amongst people here. And it wasn't long, Barbara, before we had a relationship, a partnership, and I can't tell you how much joy it's given me to have you make this journey with us. You've been such an incredible support, such an incredible just source of hope for me. I often tell this story. Right next to our property there is a graveyard, because when the mine was operating, miners used to come from all over Africa and all over southern Africa to, the streets that were supposed to be paved with gold, to work as laborers on the mine. But because of the risks involved, many, many, many of them died, and then were just buried right there on the border of our property. And I've counted amongst over 2,000 graves that I myself have counted. They're just heaps of rock all over. There are only about 5 that have headstones. So those are all unmarked graves. And on my worser days, when things are really tough, and I really thought God had given up on us and maybe was just having a doze, I used to go and sit amongst those gravestones and cry, because I thought of the many lives that were going to be disappointed and left in the lurch if what I thought had to happen, that the school was going to close, if it really happened. But then I would remember people like yourselves, or a donation would come in, from somewhere, and that was God saying, Sharron, we're not done yet. We're not done. There are those who care, and yes, we don't see them often, maybe don't hear from them. Been reminded over and over and over of those whom God has collectively used, and through whom God has used to do this miracle, which it really is. By human standards, it's been a miracle. So for your generosity and love and support, I don't think anyone will ever know quite how much it's meant to me and to those who are at the school.
Well, 20 years or more now of the school ministry has been underway, 10 years or so of our relationship with you. There is a chapel of the cross on the grounds of the school, and there is still a vision and a dream for what is next. And we are incredibly grateful to be hearers of that story, to continue to be invited into and to be partners walking with you in love. Even as we walk and gather and pray here in this place, our pilgrimage brings us back and forth from continent to continent. You are here with us with residency with some members of your community, and we will inevitably have another pilgrimage back to that place. And God holds us all in between. We're so glad that you could be with us and tell us parts of that story. We know there's a lot more. And I hope that folks can join us for conversation and questions at the reception that is going to follow this gathering.
That'd be wonderful.
Wonderful. Let's appreciate Sharron and the work of her ministry. As I said, there are more stories to tell, but there are also opportunities to hear Mother Sharron this coming Sunday at the 9 and 11:15 a.m. services. She will be preaching. She will also offer some of her words to the congregation as part of the faith formation service, faith formation offering in the parish hall at 10:15, and we have a reception following this. We are extremely grateful for the funding of the Lilly Endowment, My Spiritual Awakening speaker series that allows us to be in conversation, again, with spiritual and vocational leaders, and for the Global Mission Committee for all of the work that you've done to prepare the pathway for Sharron and your companions to be with us. We are so glad that you're here with us at the Chapel of the Cross and to build bridges to the next generation.
Wonderful. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all. I hope to see you in the parish hall.
Right. Thank you.